Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us today for the second in our two-part series, and I really care about this series, called Rebuilding the Federal Workforce. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Nokia, for making this timely conversation possible. In part one, we identified issues that have arisen in recent years from the federal workforce experiencing a steep loss of senior talent, I would even say mid-talent, and subject matter experts. This afternoon, we're going to explore pathways the Biden administration can take to hopefully attract talent back and inspire a whole new generation to participate in public service. It's going to be a tough hill to climb. We will also examine how agencies can be re-equipped with funds and resources to meet the needs of this time. And to help us do that, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. In fact, for me, it's a bucket list lineup of speakers. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events, all one word, all The Hill, at The Hill Events, and using the hashtag TheHillGov, G-O-V. We're broadcasting live. We'll be taking your questions throughout the program. I love your questions. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, click refresh, and it should take care of things. We begin the program with two leaders who have had a front row seat to federal personnel matters and a presidential transition. Andy Card, one of the people I most respect in this town for really decades, and I don't want to age him because he's a great guy, is the former White House Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush, ran the Auto Manufacturers Association. I have a long history with him that he doesn't know about, but it's really, really great to have Andy Card on here. And Clay Johnson is the former Executive Director of the Bush-Cheney Transition, former Assistant to the President for Presidential Personnel, and former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Look, I want to thank both of you for joining us today because, this is sort of one of those wonky topics, but it's so vital and important because a government, as I learned from listening to Andy Card, is only as good as its people and its interaction on issues and challenges. So, Andy Card, it's great to see you. Clay, great to see you. Let me just start with Andy and ask you for a moment. You've sat and you've presided over transitions in personnel, and I assume there's always some issue of which way the wind is going to blow that hits people in government. But when you look across the government right now, without casting blame, maybe we'll do that later, there's just a thinness in expertise across a lot of key parts of government today. So if we were to bring you both back into government and you were going to entice and seduce people to come back, what would be the first things you would do? Andy?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Steve, for having me on, and thank Nokia for sponsoring this. And yes, you trigger a lot of great memories, and it's not PTSD, so thank you very much. With regard to, the backbone of our government are the career public servants. And yes, unfortunately, our democracy has been tarnished for the last 4 years, and it needs to be polished. And of greater significance is the tarnishing of our democracy also had a tendency to reduce the number of people who are willing to go into career public service and really work for the government. The backbone of our government are really the career public servants, especially the leadership of the senior executives in service, the SES crowd. And I want to do all I can to help people recognize that the people who are working in the government, not working in the White House, are the ones that really implement all of the policies that are made at the White House. And so if they're not doing their job, our government doesn't work. And so, yes, I would be out there polishing the noble call of public service, encouraging young people to sign up to become civil servants, public civil servants. It's a great career because you make a difference. And the truth is you get to make a difference by seeing how the policies that are being implemented work. And that knowledge is helpful at advising those political appointees that come in that may have a great idea, but it won't work because the people in government say, we tried that years ago and it didn't work. You want to try it a different way or do it something else. So it's a good path for people to take if they want to make a difference in basically helping other people in the United States and around the world. And I do encourage people to, take a look at public service. Not necessarily the political aspects of it, but the really make a difference public service. And right now, I'm sure the folks at the White House are focusing on who in government really does their job well, and how do we get them to help us know what we should be doing to help them do their job well.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's really a great place to start. And Clay, on the first segment that we did this, a month or so ago, we had someone tell the story of President George H.W. Bush, and I think I have this right, and it may have been George W. Bush, who went very early in his administration and went over to the Constitution Hall and essentially met with, department heads and deputy department heads and said, I value you, I value what you're doing, here's what we want to do, and really connected with those people that we kind of call the bureaucracy, but basically said, we can't do that. And I haven't heard anything like that happening in a very long period of time. Is that the kind of step you think is needed to restore morale and a sense of, what Andy was just talking about, a sense of higher purpose in what's doing, give people confidence that they've got solid grounding again?
Yes, I think that the need is to focus on what is possible to accomplish and whatever the administration is prepared to accomplish. What results, what kind of successes do they want to achieve for the American people? And let's get together and do this because it will make our country better and make it better over in this area and that area. President George W. Bush spoke to a large crowd of SESs at the beginning of his first term and his second term. And I know probably other presidents have done it as well. And it is very well received, and it's fun to be there and watch all this unfold. H.W. Bush and George W. Bush are both pretty good cheerleaders, and they did a good job of getting the crowd going. The key that I found is back me stop for a second. President Bush said to me when I was setting up, this was true in Texas as well. I did the same work for him in Texas that I did in the personnel area in Washington, which was help him identify the best people to come in these senior positions and affect the efforts that they wanted to unfold to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish.
Right.
And focus on results-oriented people that go out and to their job every day with an idea in mind of what success, what outcome they want to achieve in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and rally their people around it and get them super excited about it, and then promise that there's going to be a big celebration when they accomplish it and so forth and so on, and then do that. So it's not about working at things, not about working at being better. It's about being better and being very results oriented, and to get Congress aligned that way, to get the funding aligned that way, to develop accountabilities and transparencies to drive behavior that way. And then as you reach out to new people to come in, or to old people that have left, or previous employees, and ask them to come back or encourage them to come back, talk about how much more results-oriented this administration or the next administration is going to be, and get them excited about what they will be a part of accomplishing for the country. Because there's, civil service sounds like an administrative state, and an administrative state is not something that would normally be a concept you want to rally the troops around. I think the thing to rally around is what the government could accomplish if everybody focused on it in the right way, and the funding was right, and the management of the personnel was right. Because I think there's huge opportunities to improve the way it manages itself, the government, and the people that come in now and the people that are already in the government can be a part of causing the federal government to be like the American people would really like it to be. That opportunity is the big appeal, I think, that's out there to draw people in.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, have become, look at that administrative state, what you just call administrative, that have turned it the deep state. David Rhodes said it's not a deep state, it's an administrative state, that's there, and, in his book that kind of looks at this. But Andy, I would come back to you and I said, I worked in the Senate. I've known a lot of people in Republican and Democratic administrations, new people, part of the other policy wonk world in think tanks and the Congressional Research Service, people all in the policy world. And if there's one thing I would describe, there's that old William Faulkner line, and when somebody asked William Faulkner how he wrote all those books, he says, I couldn't help it. And, you almost meet policy people who can't help but be the policy people they are. that they're obsessed with some widget, a better idea of doing things, some notion of public. So that notion of what you're just talking about, public service, is there in most of them because they're obsessed with how to get people connected in broadband or how to get health care responsibly, extended across the board, or, any national security. So I guess my question, Andy, is what's getting in, because most people I know who are great policy hands, it's different than politics, are obsessive, compulsive about that. What's getting in the way of them just being unleashed to come back? What are the barriers we have to remove?
I think the greatest barrier is communication. If there's no communication, you feel as if you're not making a difference or you're not relevant. And I can tell you, I could not have done my job as Secretary of Transportation or as a White House staffer or certainly Chief of Staff if it weren't for my recognition that the people that make a difference in how the government functions are the career public servants. So I would always want to ask them, how will this be implemented? Not what is the policy, how will the policy be implemented? Because the definition of policy is really about its implementation. All of us can make up policy. Believe me, everybody wakes up and we can make up policy. But if you don't implement the policy to live up to the president's expectation, let's say, you're not contributing much to the process. And the people who implement policy are the most knowledgeable about the consequences. And if you talk to them, you will identify more unintended consequences, so your policy will be better. So if you care deeply about, like, transportation, for example, I used to count on the career public servant staff at the Department of Transportation to tell me what should a good transportation network look like and how should we implement this policy. And boy, did they make a difference. So yes, if you care about policy, if you have a passion for healthcare, you want to work at the Department of Health and Human Services or the FDA or CDC. You want to do that because you'll be hands-on, you'll be making a difference. The same thing if you're in any other policy area. Find out where your niche is, get in, make a difference, and you will be relevant.
One of the questions that's out there of critics for some of this conversation, Clay, is what biases that administrative state may have. There's an interesting story in Bart Gellman's book about called Angler, the Cheney Vice Presidency, where she talks about Vice President Cheney calling a very, 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 I call it deeply placed official. I think it was Department of Interior, had to do with a stream and fishing and salmon and construction. But it was unusual that the vice president would reach so deeply into there and then get results, which is not biased, but it shows that there was a kind of level of engagement that many people hadn't seen before, which stood out. But it also raises the question of staffers that come with a different bias in what they do, or different perspective or frame. How do you square that over time? What are the constructive ways to solve some of those problems? Because that is what comes up in the minds of many Americans right now when you talk to them about workforce and the federal government, that it's somehow biased against the executive branch, even though it's part of the executive branch.
Well, let me give you an example of what this has really happened. And follow up, it's kind of a real life example of what Andy was talking about. A bill was passed in Congress to create the Department of Homeland Security, and they were told to stand up, for instance, the Transportation Department, the airports, Homeland Security and airports, in 13 months.
Right.
They did. Jim Loy, who was the head of the department, to be the head of the department, was took 6 months and he didn't hire one person. They had to hire 100,000 people. They didn't hire one person for 6 months because they spent that was 6 months deciding what those 100,000 people were going to do. So it wasn't just hire a bunch of people and put them out there. It was to do what? And you needed left-handed people to do this and right-handed people to do that and technical people and whatever. And so it was all driven by a clear picture of what success meant 13 months out. When the question was how to create a safe port, somebody said, how we decide, or we were talking about
right.
Homeland Security in general, and somebody said, let's take a port of New Orleans and figure that out. Everybody looked at each other, the port of New Orleans, what do you mean? He said, well, a boat comes into New Orleans. This was a career person who was
Right.
talking about this. Posed this question to this meeting of about 30 career people who were there to participate in an effort to decide what Homeland Security should be. What does that mean? What does it mean?
Yeah.
Department of Homeland Security. They decided when a ship comes in, you don't know where it is. You need satellites. You need this. We went through every different scenario, and we finally found one where it required, if you had to have satellite, you had to have this, and you had to have all these kinds of things. In about 20 minutes, everybody looked at each other and said, we just defined what it means to have what a picture of a secure port is.
Right.
Let's get out of here. Let's go get it and make that happen. The career people did that. They
Wow.
were asked to do it, and they stepped up and did it in a fantastic fashion.
Right.
They weren't told, come on, let's go and process some paperwork and so forth. Let's focus on what the picture of success is and keep coming back to that picture and emphasize. The management was encouraged throughout the process, working with the career staff,
Right.
keep coming back to that picture of success. That gets that adrenaline going, and that's what everybody can be proud to be a part of accomplishing.
Thank you for that. Andy, we're right out of time, but I want to ask you just one last question, because you're both talking about transitions. I mean, this was a little bit into your transition with President Bush, but of course you were chief of staff when 9/11 hit. We saw Barack Obama come in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. We've seen Joe Biden come in with a COVID crisis. And I guess the question I want to just ask you as we wrap this up, along the lines that Clay Johnson was just talking about, how do you keep from becoming a reactive presidency and becoming a strategic presidency, where you've got your stakeholders and you've got your team, where you're not driven by everything hitting and gut-punching you and trying to define you from the outside? As I know you know that topic because you were in the middle of that. How do you prevent that from hijacking the next 4 years?
You have to have, first of all, you have to have tunnel vision, or at least know the people who have tunnel vision that can help you. So you need the experts. But I would argue that the chief of staff's job is to have peripheral vision so that they aren't just lost in a tunnel. They actually are understanding what's the context, what else has to be done at the same time. So I would say, find the people with tunnel vision, make sure they're focusing on that which they should be doing, and then have peripheral vision to understand where you have to be nimble and make sure you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Right now, the anchor for President Biden is actually the knowledge pool that career public servants have. They know what's happening inside the tunnel, and they know what's happening in terms of peripheral vision. So hopefully that knowledge makes its way up into the White House, so they're not just dealing with theory, they're dealing with reality. And the pandemic is the best example. President Biden inherited a horrible pandemic with all kinds of challenges. Getting these vaccines out is going to be a huge challenge. He recognizes the challenge. He didn't have all the information during the transition coming in, but now he has access to all of the information. And it's the career public servants that are the ones that are going to say, this was working, this was not working, we didn't do this, we should have done that. And that's the great basis which they have to do. So I'm saying, I hope everybody at the White House respects the need for tunnel vision, but has the courage to have peripheral vision and find others who actually understand what is going on. So that's where the problems are, and that's where you can first fix a problem and find a greater solution.
Well, Clay Johnson, Andy Card. Clay is a former executive director of the Bush-Cheney transition, handled everything in personnel and people and budgets. Andy Card, former chief of staff to President George W. Bush, former secretary of transportation. These are two icons in this question of how do you get personnel aligned, as Clay Johnson said, with purpose, and how can you be both peripheral and tunnel. We learned a lot. We couldn't have started today better than we did. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Our next guest has more than 3 decades of experience supporting government workers and fighting for their benefits and protections. That's going to be a big topic. A veteran and a pastor, Everett Kelly was named National President of the American Federation of Government Employees in February 2020. Everett, great to see you. You know this world. You know, we've just been talking about one. How do you bring people back? How do you create an esprit de corps that, you know, people feel valued, that they've got purpose? Because right now, a lot of people left government, but you're also involved, you know, on the union side of protecting them and their benefits. And if I were to add one element, if I'd had 5 more minutes with the gentleman before, I would have said, what do you do when you have whistleblowers, when you have people that worry about when government are, and you see their names dragged out, you see them abandoned? And I guess my question to you is, you know, if you were to say, you know, not for my conversation, but, you know, for all the blind spots that are out there that are talking about our federal government employees and what they need to succeed in this next couple of years, what are the things that don't get talked about that we need to talk about?
Well, I think that, first of all, let me say thank you for having me, Steve. I think that, you know, things that is not talked about that need to be talked about is the importance of having, you know, the federal workers, you know, at the table having discussions about, you know, what works better in the workplace. You know, I found out a long time ago that if you want to know, you know, how to resolve an issue, you talk to the person that's actually dealing with that issue every single day.
So when you're talking that issue and you've got those people that you're talking to every day about how they would do that, I guess my concern right now is you know, read the Washington Post. We have scientists that have left in droves. We have lots of workers that have left in droves. You know, the administration has not, the previous administration shrank government by letting folks go and not hiring more folks. You know, what is the state of play? What does the dashboard look like in terms of the need, as your folks see it, of the number of personnel that need to be brought back into government?
Okay, well, you know, I think that, you know, what we got to see, okay, we got to see the Biden administration really, you know, honing in on, you know, the revocation of the Trump's EOs on collective bargaining. You know, we have to see that if we're going to ever see, you know, federal and government employees really feel like they have a place, you know, then we're going to have to see that type of thing. You know, these EOs, you know, especially on the collective bargaining, you know, it's taken away, you know, the union's ability and the employee's ability to actually, you know, represent its employees. It's taken away the time that employees have to represent their members. And, you know, I have to say this, that the action that President Biden took, you know, to revoke at least a couple of the EOs on collective bargaining, it's a tremendous relief. But revocation alone, you know, didn't just get us to where we need to be, you know, because these imposed phony contracts, you know, need to disappear if we're going to have, you know, employees to feel like they really have a place in the government system.
Let me ask you, because I really don't know the answer to this question, and so please forgive me if I'm naive. Do things like the $15 an hour minimum wage for federal contracts and federal, is that in your terrain? Because I was surprised that we would have federal government employees at $15 an hour, but you know, at that level, because to some that may sound like a big jump, but in federal government positions it didn't. So I'm interested in whether that's part of your terrain. And when it comes to government employees and their standard of living today and what they're paid and compensated, you know, at I wouldn't say the highest level, but the average level, are we doing what we should be doing?
Well, let me say this. First of all, I think that everybody needs to understand that all federal employees does not make $15 an hour.
Right.
Okay, we have several thousands of federal employees that makes less than $15 an hour. So this is directly within our terrain. It's right on our doorstep. And so this executive order should mean a lot to a lot of our employees. Okay. And if people think that, you know, I don't know if people think that federal employees make an absorbent amount, but we are certainly behind, you know, when it comes to comparison of other like jobs in the federal system. I think that pay is lacking.
What do you think, what are the other dimensions? You know, I've been looking at your tweets, Everett. I like your tweets a lot, actually, and they're, you know, have humanity embedded in them, which is a rare and complicated thing to do in a tweet. But when you kind of look at respect and the respect of workers who are doing these jobs really for public service, I mean, they're castigated in a lot of areas. You know, you have the talk about bureaucrats, federal workers being lethargic. You have a lot of things that are said about them that I sometimes find very abhorrent. Your tweets are saying, hey, these folks deserve respect, dignity, and whatnot. And I guess my question to you is, we're doing a program tomorrow on listening to America, going around the nation every corner. If you were to take one of your people, working on a commercial food line or doing FEMA work or doing out there and doing public service, and they wanted to be heard right now, what do you think some of the things are that they would say?
Well, my mind goes right away to like some of our VA workers, right? Who has had their contract imposed upon them from this previous administration that seemingly didn't care about the frontline workers, have had to fight for just personal protective equipment. I think that you would hear them say, I just want, to make sure that when I go to work every day, that I'm safe because I want to do my job. I love doing my job. I just want to do it in a very safe way. I think you would hear them say that. I think you would hear them say that, there's so many forms of discrimination, and especially in the VA. We did some surveys that said that 78%, of the workforce have experienced some form of discrimination. I think you would hear them say collectively that I think that we need to get rid of, a secretary that, believes and support this type of actions and have a secretary that believe in supporting all people. I think you would hear those type of things, especially from some of our VA workers.
Everett, just last question. There's been a lot of the discussion lately about Schedule F reclassification of workers, and to make that simple for folks, basically taking civil servant positions and classifying them as political positions. You could put political appointees and dislodge civil service employees. What do you think is the Biden administration has stepped forward yesterday and repealed that effort by the Trump administration to do that? Are we out of the woods on that? Does that continue to be a problem and concern for you?
Well, I hope we're out of the woods on that, and I appreciate you bringing that out because when I first heard the terminology, Schedule F, and began to read what it really does, I said that F is for flunkies because what the previous administration was looking for was political appointees that would just march to the president's beat rather than giving credence to a person that has credentials, to be able to do a job and do it effectively. So I'm glad to know that the President Biden has revoked that executive order, and I hope we never see another thing like that again because it's not conducive and it's not beneficial to federal employees, especially as they are trying to make, policy, that's best for the agency. When you have a political appointee to do this, then it eliminates that opportunity.
Well, Everett Kelly, National President of the American Federation of Government Employees, I really enjoyed this conversation. Very, very important what you do, and I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve, for having us. We'll come back anytime. Thank you.
And now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get going, a quick clarification. While I'm connecting these interviews, and the questions are mine, like really mine, I don't even know, these are going to be zingers. The content of this portion of the event shouldn't be considered editorial. We really appreciate Nokia's support of the program today. With that, I'd like to welcome Grace Coe, the newly named Vice President of Legislative Affairs at Nokia. Grace, it's great to have you. Let me just throw my first zinger at you, Grace. We've been talking about this question of how you lure solid, thoughtful, motivated, public-interested people back into the federal workforce. But I don't want this to be a kumbaya discussion, right? What are the complexities of that? You've been in and out of this. You've been an ambassador. You've worked in the halls of Congress. You know the different dimensions. How do you make that a rich environment as opposed to a bland one? How do you get people in that environment to take risks and to do cool and innovative and different things if things aren't working? In other words, I do want federal government to be solid, whatever, but I also worry about things going stale. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Steve, for that question. This program is going just so much better than I could even have imagined. It's such an important topic, and it's so necessary right now here at the transition. We're looking at a draining of the expertise here in the federal government. A lot of people have resigned or or retired during the past 4 years. And we definitely need to rebuild that expertise again, especially right now as we're transitioning from one government to the next. As we've got to carry on. How do we bring people in to build that expertise? It's almost the same with any other work environment. You provide a stable, predictable workplace where I think your ideas are appreciated and heard. And I can talk a little bit just simply to the things that drew me to government service. I had worked in the private sector for some time before I actually joined the staff on the Hill, and it was a real desire to understand how the policymaking happens, and it was a real desire to understand sort of the complexities of federal service. Anyone who works in the policy space at all would benefit from time in the government, and you have the added sort of rush, I guess, of actually working for the American people. There's nothing like actually being able to say, I'm representing the United States of America in a treaty negotiation, or even very simply, you're representing the interests of a specific population or community in the negotiations over a bill, or in any such situation. You have access to information. People are so willing to work with you and educate you when you are part of the federal government. It's an experience like no other. But as in any other work environment, if you don't have the freedom, the backing, the support of your politicals, all of that, if that's not there, then it makes it so much harder to do your job. And it makes it so much harder to actually succeed at what you want to do personally as for your own growth, but also in terms of what you think is the right way to proceed on the course of policy.
I can feel the passion, just as you talked about, being an ambassador, representing the government, doing this. And as I just mentioned, Andy Card, most people I know like you, or, your colleague, Brian Hendricks. I'll just be honest, Brian Hendricks is an obsessive compulsive about getting connectivity, right? It's like he can't help but talk about that. And so, part of that is, I'm just wondering, right now when we have a deficit of those people, that's where we are today. So part of it is getting them back in. Are there other things that we're not thinking about, at least for that? I know firms are self-interested, let's just be honest. Firms are self-interested. But is there a commons? Is there a partnership? Is there a safe zone that can be created in this time where, like on broadband connectivity in the country, which, given the COVID crisis, we've got to solve. We've got to solve the education problem, the last mile problem. And as Brian has taught me over and over again, your colleague, we've failed in that for now decades. So I think the question is, how do you bring people back, but also how do you unleash some creative new ideas? Do you have any thoughts on how to create that safe space when we don't have all the people in government that we may need right now?
Absolutely. I think the United States is so unique in partnering with the private industry in a way that I think no other government ever has done before. Or I just don't think that the same sort of partnerships are available in many other countries. First of all, I'd like to address the question of the revolving door. I know DC is always sort of vilified for being a swamp where people just go in and out of government and then reap the benefits. There's some truth to that, obviously, but there's also a lot of a benefit that comes out of the expertise that comes from going back and forth within private sector and the public sector. And believe it or not, a lot of people are actually interested in doing the best they can in order to move a policy initiative forward, either from the private sector or from the political or from the government side. And I think it's in the United States' best interest to take advantage of that desire to serve, so to bring the expertise from the private sector into the government to serve, or to take that expertise from the government and seed it out into the private sector. This is why I have gone back and forth between the private sector and the government, because I have really, I think that it's really incredibly important, I think, to be able to take what you learn from each side and spread it throughout the other environment, so that there is a better understanding, so that both sides can mesh together and work together very well. I think there's been some really interesting partnerships when it comes to cybersecurity, for example. Cybersecurity has been able to take advantage of and there's still a long way to go, obviously, but they've been able to take advantage of, I think, things like the the NIST Cybersecurity Center for Excellence. They've been able to work. There's an FBI sort of coordinated cybersecurity center as well that takes advantage of the expertise in the private sector and also marries it with the information from the government and sort of tries to conduct real world cyber operations and also make policy from that. That sort of intermarriage can be really, really beneficial and also supplements, I think, the lack of resources sometimes that comes in the government. But that kind of intermingling with obviously, useful guardrails that keep us from, succumbing to our worst tendencies.
Right.
Would be very helpful, I think, in moving things forward. I'd love to see more of that. In fact, I was just listening to a great Planet Money podcast about how Taiwan was able to do crowdsourced applications, what their sort of public interest hackers were calling forking the government. It's really fascinating, actually, to be able to get that expertise from the private sector into government service.
So, Grace, let me ask you just two questions. We're nearly out of time, but I want to get, so one very short question, because I've got a kind of a question that'll, an uncomfortable question for you to end with. But the quick question is, when we see the stories of Russian hacking, you mentioned cybersecurity, various cybersecurity initiatives. Do you think, just in your gut, do you feel this nation and the government are going to get to a point where the cybersecurity standard we have is less penetrable? It's become a constant theme in all our discussions right now that in this country, with the big companies we have, we're seeing hacks after hacks after hacks. Is this issue going to go away and get solved? Yes or no?
Yes or no? Yes or no question like that, Steve. That's a real poser. Okay.
Maybe.
You are the moderator. We're always going to be working towards improving that situation. I think we are always going to be working towards getting more people into the government that can help us figure out how to move faster, how to defend against the adversary. So that's
maybe with work.
That's what we need people
that's a
here
fair
to do.
answer.
That is why we need to support that federal staff.
So here's the question you're going to be irritated by. If you had Grace Coe in government, Ambassador Grace Coe, talking to Grace Coe at Nokia, what would you really want that Grace Coe to understand that she didn't get? And likewise, what does Grace Coe in Nokia really want to tell that Grace Coe in government that she's just not getting?
That's entertaining. Oh, wow. There are so many things that I'd want to tell myself. That's look, Grace Coe at Nokia, you have to understand that there are a number of things that government is going to be concerned about that isn't going to be necessarily about efficiency. It's not going to be about the quickest bottom line, and that those things are going to move forward regardless. And Grace Coe at Nokia wants the federal government to understand that that the companies are willing to work with you. Companies are willing to work to support the initiatives and the ultimate goals that the policymaker has. Let's do this in a way that is that works with the government, takes the incentives that are in industry and actually moves them in line with creates the incentive for the companies to actually support what the government is doing, so that we can all sort of be working together in lockstep.
Well, both sides of the Grace Coe, you can come back together now. I just want to say thank you, because it's not often you find an underwriter or a supporter that says, let's just talk about how we get back to good government. That's how we get back to getting good policy expertise in place and look at that environment and ecosystem. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Grace Coe. I want to thank Nokia for your time today and supporting today's program.
Thank you, Steve.
Of all the pressing tasks facing the Biden-Harris administration, a key priority will be to attract and retain top talent to rebuild trust in government. What immediate steps need to be taken to shore up the morale of federal workers whose expertise and experience have gone unrecognized? How can Congress help at a time of great divide in government and politics in the United States? Our next guest is a member of the bipartisan working group in Congress, which works to bring Democrats and Republicans together to forge greater consensus on a wide variety of issues. He's a great guy. Representative Derek Kilmer represents the 6th District of Washington State. Derek, Congressman, great to have you with us here. You've heard, I hope, a little bit about what we're trying to get at, which is, I think we're trying to basically be objective, that right now, the state of mind of the federal worker across a lot of different divisions may not be as robust and strong and solid as it might be. And I guess, as a member of Congress looking at this challenge, whether it's in science, whether it's just doing any job, as we were just talking to the head of AFGE, what do you think the steps are that we need to take to restore that sense of morale among those people working in the public sector?
Yeah, I've been, and thanks for having me. I've been looking at this through two separate lenses. One, I represent a district where the federal government is the largest employer, and listen, over the years, I've had some of my constituents copy me on their resignations as they leave the federal service and go on to a job that may pay more, may have better benefits, and may not have the level of drama that sometimes occurs in working for the federal government. And in that respect, it highlights a few things. I'll get to the second screen that I use in a second. But listen, step one is sort of following the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. Unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen a lot of harm done to the federal workforce. Every time there's a government shutdown, it creates churn, it creates uncertainty for federal workers. So that's something that members of Congress are certainly attuned to. We saw under the Trump administration a number of executive orders that were frankly anti-worker. They were anti-union. They made it harder to bargain collectively. They made it harder for union officials to use official time for collective bargaining activities. They weakened due process protections for federal workers. And thankfully, I think one important step, and I had put forward legislation in this regard already, was taken last week with the Biden administration rescinding some of those Trump-era executive orders. The second screen that I'm focused on, I chair a committee in Congress called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. It's been sort of nicknamed the Fix Congress Committee. One of the concerns that we have is also people, Congress is frankly only as strong as the staff who work in Congress. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of people leaving congressional staffs as well, whether they're in member offices or in committees. That erodes the ability of Congress to solve big problems for the American people. And so chairing the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, we've looked at a whole bunch of reforms that Congress can make to try to recruit, retain, and have a more diverse staff working for the legislative branch.
I really appreciate both those frames. I mean, I think the second frame, we really hadn't gotten into that a little bit as much. I used to be a Hill staffer, in the Senate working for Senator Bingaman. And Jeff Bingaman was sort of like the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington type who wanted people who really knew policy issues. It's just a different scene, but we'll get to that in a minute. But, I do want to ask, I was on the phone the other day listening to Susan Rice, who's now, Ambassador Susan Rice is now the president's domestic policy advisor. And she's talked about equity. She's talked about rolling back some of the provisions on that were getting in the way by way of teaching and orientation around everything from harassment to orientation about identity inside the federal workplace. We had the president today basically remove all the restrictions on transgendered service in the military. And I guess my question is, are they getting it right? What needs to be more? Is our government and those people who work for the government looking like America? And are we embracing that diversity, which has been so much a topic? But, I sometimes wonder, are we walking the walk?
I think it's a really important point. It's something that Congress has grappled with as well. I mentioned the Select Committee that I chair. One of our recommendations was to make permanent the Office of Diversity and Inclusion so that Congress as an institution focuses like a laser on diversity and inclusion and does walk the walk. I will tell you, I mentioned the largest employer in my district is the federal government. It's actually the largest employer in my district is Naval-based Kitsap. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that's done at our naval base. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard has extraordinary professionals that come in every day doing incredibly important work that is just vital to our national security. And I will tell you, under their prior command, they undertook an effort at diversity and inclusion training because there had been some issues in terms of having adequate respect for all of the federal workforce. And I will tell you, having that training was something that was widely embraced. People actually really appreciated the focus on it, on valuing all federal workers, only unfortunately to see that progress stymied by a Trump-era memorandum that prohibited it, an executive order that prohibited diversity and inclusion training. That's a step backwards. So when I talk about, do no harm, that's the type of thing that moves us in the wrong direction. And, as I talk to folks at the Naval Shipyard in my district and said, what can we do to help? One of the things they said is, let us do diversity and inclusion training again. I think that is important. Having that focus in the federal workforce, whether we're talking about a naval base or whether we're talking about Congress, it is important to have that focus.
Congressman, we're going to have a question for you in a second, but I want to slip one more of my own in here. I mean, one of the inspirations for me in today's program, were two books I read. One by a friend, David Rode, who wrote about, the kind of dismantling the kind of argument of the deep state, deep inside. And the other was Michael Lewis's The Fifth Risk. And I don't know if you read these, but Michael Lewis, essentially, before this administration, the last administration even got going, said, key people who know how to protect us on nuclear fronts, or know how about the impact of weather on farming, or folks that have been involved with the Do Not Call registry, deep reservoirs of ideas and actually getting things done were leaving. And so then the worry was that the fifth risk was project management. And what was useful for me in that book, but also David Rhodes' book, was having a kind of show and tell of potential disasters. Do we need to have a show and tell of how we succeed again? Because I find this the most difficult part of this conversation. How do you go from these kind of meta-concept ideas of government service is good to basically showing this is where you get the tangible result and our lives are better or worse because of these decisions? So I guess I'm going to put a lot of responsibility on you. Do you think we need a show and tell of sorts on those kind of projects well managed or badly managed?
I do think there is value in elevating the important work that's done by the federal government on a daily basis, and we see it in every agency that works in our district. Unfortunately, it doesn't get a lot of media coverage when the VA provides extraordinary veterans care to veterans in my district. It should get that attention. We should elevate that important work. I will tell you, it got a ton of media attention when there was controversy around wait times. I represent more military veterans than any Democrat in Congress. My district really benefits when the VA does its job right. I have an extraordinary national park in my district, and the people who work there and who improve the visitor experience for the more than 3 million people who come and visit the Olympic National Park, they play such an important role. I mentioned the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. I worry sometimes when, whether it be online or in the media or in politicians who sort of bash the federal workforce. I got to tell you, the thousands and thousands of folks who go into the Naval Shipyard each day are doing incredible work with nuclear carriers and submarines with a level of technical skill that really blows your mind every time you go and visit that. And I think there is some value, certainly to policymakers, of highlighting that important work so they stop treating our federal workforce like the piñata at the party.
Right.
But I would argue that's also important with the American public too. You had for years on one of the news programs, in essence, the fleecing of America, how the federal government's wasting your money. I'm someone who actually believes it is important to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, but we also need to make sure that we're highlighting success, so people understand the vitally important work that many agencies, they probably never even heard of, that work that's happening on a daily basis. I really think it is important to elevate that and to celebrate that.
Well, maybe this is a small step in that direction today. Let's take a quick question from Herberto. Herberto?
Hi, my name is Heriberto Leon, Union Steward with the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 704, representing EPA employees in the Great Lakes. What specific laws should be passed to prevent future administrations from issuing executive orders the way Trump did in May 2018 that attack collective bargaining, official time, and the merit system? Civil service laws need to be strengthened to protect democracy itself from massive politicization and allegiance to a leader.
If you have a quick thought on that, Congressman.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question and appreciate his work. As someone who represents the Puget Sound region, we partner, the Puget Sound team partners a lot with the Great Lakes team and the Chesapeake Bay team, so thank you for your work. I think you're right on target. I introduced a bill called the Protecting Federal Workers Act to nullify those executive orders and the presidential memorandum that were really attacks on the federal workforce. It is not right that you saw this politicization. And it's something that, is just one of many things, frankly, that I think Congress is going to have to take a look at. I think we're at somewhat of almost like a post-Watergate moment where after the Nixon administration, there was a real look by Congress at what types of reforms need to happen to prevent the type of abuse that we'd seen in the prior administration. I say we'd seen, I was a baby at the time, but that Congress had seen under the prior administration. I think when it comes to the treatment of workers, when it comes to the protection of collective bargaining rights, when it comes to civil service protections, and frankly, when it comes to a whole bunch of other things, including the abuse of pardon power, the abuse of the Hatch Act. I mean, who would have thought that we would have seen a political parties convention take place on the White House lawn this last year?
Right.
And those are the types of circumstances, perhaps unforeseen, that Congress needs to look at and say, how do we prevent this type of abuse from happening again, not just under this administration, but any administration going forward?
Well, Congressman Derek Kilmer of Washington State, chair of the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. I neglected to mention co-sponsor of the Federal Worker Leave Fairness Act and lots of other cool stuff. I really appreciate your time and thoughtful comments today. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, and keep at it, everybody. We sure appreciate you.
For a nation trying to emerge from a pandemic, what will new agency heads and their staff need in order to be effective and efficient? I'm joined by three really cool experts who can answer that question and so much more. Max Stier is the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. He was a star in the Michael Lewis book, The Fifth Risk. The organization works with federal agencies, Congress, and the White House to improve the federal workforce and strengthen government operations. Dr. Catherine Newcomer is a professor at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University. We all love Steve Trachtenberg, which we can get into later maybe. And she's recently published a book, Federal Inspectors General. I love this topic. Federal Inspectors General, the Truth Seekers in Turbulent Times. That is one I would stay up at night to read, not fall asleep. And Catherine Archuleta was appointed by President Barack Obama to be the first Latina to lead the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. She is currently founding partner at Dimension Strategies. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Max, we met many years ago. I don't know if you remember when I was at the Atlantic, Elizabeth Keffer, the Sammys. And I just want to ask you for a moment. When there is this part in the Fifth Risk with Michael Lewis talking about you and focusing on sort of points of excellence, to go back to George H.W. Bush, points of light in the federal government, people that did extraordinary things. And I'd just love to get a sense, when I first met, it was probably 10 years ago or more, but from that moment way back then, is there any diminishment in that? Are the lights still burning bright? Did they get muffled for a bit? What's your dashboard look like in terms of the story of federal workers making a difference for this nation?
Well, Steve, first of all, I remember when we met, and thank you for putting this event and series of events together. It's really so important. There are crazy issues taking place right now that are diverse and enormously challenging. And it would be easy to forget that at the end of the day, if we don't have a healthy government, we're not going to be able to address any of them. And so, the American people should feel blessed that they continue to have an extraordinary civil service that continues to do amazing things. Just this morning, I got the update on over 300 nominations that we received so far. for the SAMIs, the Samuel J. Heyman Service to American Medals Program. And they continue to do, awesome things. And obviously, one of my recent favorites is Tony Fauci, who was our Federal Employee of the Year last year. How can you do better than that? The truth, however, is that we have exceptional people in the federal government who are career civil servants. They're working incredibly hard, and they're being failed bluntly by their leaders and the system that they're having to operate in. So Congressman Kilmer, who was on before, we have a legacy government that hasn't kept up with the world around it. It needs to be modernized. We've had an administration that took a sledgehammer to the workforce and to a lot of the key institutions of our government. But it also followed, in my view, decades of rust. The reality is we have to reinvest in our career civil service if we're going to be able to meet not only the challenges of today, which are extraordinary, but also obviously the challenges of tomorrow.
Well, when I asked Derek Kilmer about whether or not we needed a show and tell of great stories in government and what it had achieved, I was thinking about the SAMIs and I'm thinking about the Partnership for Public Service in a way for that. But let me ask Catherine. I've got two Catherines on, but Catherine, we'll start with Catherine Newcomer and then jump to Catherine Archuleta. Catherine Newcomer, IGs also tell stories. They're storytellers, and they're telling stories of what has gone well, what hasn't gone well, what's happened. Did we get what was expected from funding? I am an avid reader of IG reports, particularly on national security issues, Afghanistan. So let me just ask you bluntly, I'd like to get any line from you on that dimension of governance, but I do read IG reports, and I also see how regularly they are ignored. And the gap between what is done and what is reported on seems to me to be pretty wide. So tell me where I'm wrong.
You're not wrong at all. So it's my pleasure to be here, by the way, with such a great lineup you have today. Thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure.
So there are two sets of offices that I would say need attention and are wonderful places to work. One are the Inspector General offices, and the other are the offices that are tasked with implementing the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. So speaking of the IGs, right now of the 75, 14 of the offices, the leaders, the leadership is vacant. 13 of those are the type that need presidential appointment and Senate confirmation. And the scary thing is the ones that need appointees are like Defense, CIA, the Treasury, HHS, Labor, very important players. And one of the things that people don't understand about IGs is that, yes, they ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse, and they get the bad guys, sent to jail. But that is really only a very small portion of what they do. They actually have financial auditing, performance auditing. They are in charge of understanding where the risks exist in an agency's operation, what kind of internal controls are needed, what programs and policies need strengthening. They should be the first person that a new secretary, a new administrator goes to say, brief me, tell me about my organization, where do I need to work, what needs to be done. We need really wonderful, strong leaders with integrity to be appointed to these roles. And then we have to also, just as Max was just saying, we need IT skills. If we're going to be dealing with cybersecurity risks, which IGs do, you need to have very skilled people with the skills. Also, we now have evaluation officers that have been appointed in the main agencies, but they need staff. Right now, they have been doing a capacity assessment to figure out what kind of capacity do we have in the agencies to build and produce evidence to inform decision making. And those offices, both sets of offices, by the way, are fabulous places to work. And I know we produce at the Trachtenberg School lots of new master's students who love to go to these offices. We need to make it easier for them to get hired.
And Catherine, before I jump to my other Catherine friend, just real quick, yes, are you finding members of Congress right now, maybe Republican and Democrat, attentive to these IG reports? Are you finding a partnership? Because part of what an IG report does is it's got to get some air. It's got to get some visibility. Otherwise, it disappears into the night. So, do you have partners? I shouldn't say do you. Do they?
Yes, most of the large IG offices have people that try to work closely with Congress. But, as you pointed out, they're fantastic reports. But if the congressman or the secretaries and so on don't read them or don't pay attention,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's unfortunate that later we say, oh my gosh, why didn't we pay attention when things really bad happen?
Okay, I want to go to Catherine Archuleta now because I'm just going to make her responsible for fixing all of this because she was Chief of Staff at the Department of Labor, Chief of Staff at the Department of Transportation, Director of the Office of Personnel Management. You're our big people person, right? So people person in government. I guess my question, along the lines of Max's and the other Catherine we're talking about, how do you get the balance and equities right between creating, an attractive magnet for talent that wants to be public service oriented and to feel the grounding and have the room to run, and, to staff and administration in the direction it wants to go? How do you get that right, Catherine?
Well, it's a lot of collaboration. I believe that the collaboration is a three-legged stool. It's the collaboration that a director of the Office of Personnel Management has with the administration, all of the cabinet secretaries, obviously the White House, in making sure that the vacancies and the needs that they have for personnel are met. And so those conversations are really critical. Obviously, the Office of Personnel Management is the second leg of that stool, but the next leg of the stool is really, really important, and that's the employees and the career individuals who dedicated their lives to federal service. We need to listen to them. They know from year to year, from administration to administration, they know what's happening in those agencies. Unfortunately, the Biden administration is facing many vacant offices, and now more than ever, the collaboration between employees, the Office of Personnel Management, and the cabinet agencies, as well as the administrations, have to be able to work together to identify where there's strengths, where there's gaps, find ways to quickly fill in those gaps because there's so much to do in the next few years. And then really being sure that everybody has voice at the table. This is where the commitment by the Biden administration to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is going to be so critical. That not only are we hiring the right folks for the jobs, but we're listening to them, we're including them in the decisions, and making sure that they feel they have a voice in the administration. And those are things I think the administration is already committed to do and will continue to strengthen that as the years go by.
Catherine, can I ask you something? Because again, this is a naive question and I should know more than I do about it, but I think there are a lot of viewers right now who probably are where I am. This is a little bit of a joke, but it's a little bit true. When the Obama administration came in, when it came to political positions, a lot of my friends said to me back then, if you supported President Obama, you got a president. If you supported Hillary Clinton, you got a job. And so those are over the political positions, and the scrambling for them. But what we've been talking a little bit about today is the civil servant positions, the people that are long-term policy experts. The Washington Post report that over 1,600 scientists have left government and haven't, these positions haven't largely been replaced. I guess my question is, what is the balance, in the OPM world you did, or even as a chief of staff at any one of these large departments, between managing the incoming political class and I hate to put it way, but the incoming substantive class? Is that fair?
Well,
maybe not. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail tomorrow, but
No, I think what you're pointing to is that the collaboration between those two has to be very strong. At the Department of Transportation, later at the Department of Labor, what I found to be true as chief of staff was that when I listened carefully about the expertise from the employees, the career service individuals, I learned so much, and they taught so much, and their dedication was so strong. They don't get paid a lot, but I tell you that it's their commitment to serving the American public is very, very strong. And when you have that balance, you have a political group of individuals who are reading sort of what that context is, along with, and equally as important, career staff, the agency runs well. It's when you have that tension, as we saw in this last administration, when you have that tension, that lack of respect, that lack of trust, is when things begin to grind to an incredible halt.
You know, I should mention before I'm going to take a question, I'm going to mention to Max Steyer, tomorrow I'm interviewing Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I will start out my conversation commending him for his Sammy Award to kind of further raise the profile that you don't need, but it'll be fun. But we have a question, I want to ask Max to lead with it, but for all of you, from Ariane Gallagher. Ariane?
My name is Ariane Gallagher, and I am the Director of the Presidential Management Fellows Program at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management's Center for Leadership Development. My question to the distinguished panel is, how do you suggest that the administration can help agencies pool and use resources effectively to build leadership, career paths, and pipelines across the federal government and across agencies and departments, both within and outside organizations and across both regional offices and headquarters? Thank you.
Ariane, thank you for that. I mean, we could organize a whole conference around that question, but
Yes.
Max, I'm going to give you a whack at it to start and then go to our Catherine's. Max?
Sure. So first, I just can't resist saying on the Fauci Award, we had it delivered by the Nationals presidents. So they delivered it. So that will certainly get a chuckle from him. They went to his house.
That's
and
great.
Gave it to him. And that's such a important question. And I totally agree with Steve. You could do a whole conference on that. And so I'm trying to think about like what element of this do I want to take on? And so I'll be a little provocative at the front end, maybe. And that is that, one of the root causes, in my view, of the management challenges in government is that we have a group of top leaders, the political appointees, who are short-term. They spend 18 months, 2 years in office, and they don't often align, therefore, with the long-term needs of the organizations they're actually responsible for. And in my view, one of the things we should change in government writ large is to have fewer political appointees. No other democracy has anywhere close to the numbers we have right now, 4,000 of them. We should have fewer Senate confirmed positions. There's just no way the Senate will ever in real time enable an administration to get their team on the field, given the numbers and the smallness of the pipe. So, one big structural reform I think that would help a lot is actually having more career leaders at more senior levels and fewer political appointees. You look at GAO as an example of an organization where the head of it has a 15-year term, and they are, committed to that long-term future because they know the investment in talent is something that will actually help them as leaders of those organizations. So, obviously we have the system we have right now, and therefore, to my view, one of the things we should be doing is providing much more in the way of transparency around the impact of getting critical talent in on outcomes, the performance of our government.
Right.
One of the reasons why we produce the best places to work rankings is because we saw at the front end that those short-term leaders could hide from the impact they were having on their organizations because no one knew. And they were long gone by that time that there was clear impact on their organizations. Now, I would say we're in a particular moment of critical need for refreshing the workforce. We have barely over 6% of the federal workforce under the age of 30. It's a shocking number. It's about 23% writ large across government. Most agencies have seen significant attrition, and their headcounts are down by 10, 12 plus percent. So that's true for Department of Labor, Education, HUD. The list is very long. The only places where that's not true, which are the biggest agencies, are the VA, DOD.
Right.
So we desperately need new talent. So anyway, lots for Catherine will be able to.
We're going to bring you back, Max,
we'll
bring you Max for the big conference we'll do on this. But let me ask Catherine Archuleta real quick, just real short form. What would be one item you do on Ariane's list?
What I would actually do is really increase the emphasis we have on professional development. Creating that pipeline is going to be so critical, and really identifying within government the stars who can become the next leaders of the agencies, the career leaders, and that's going to be critical. The same thing on the outside. How do we recruit to the positions that we need in government? And until we make those types of commitments, saying this is a incredible place to work, you can not only fulfill your work dream, but you can grow in that job. Those are the things that we need to add to what we're already doing.
Terrific. And what is your best word of advice, Catherine Newcomer?
I would look to the Intergovernmental Personnel Act and revive it. That was established years and years ago, but it allows people to go from universities into government or different levels of government, and from government personnel to go to universities and so on. It is a mechanism by which you could really quickly get people who, and there are lots of people out here that want to get in and try to repair the damage that's been done, bring in the scientific expertise, the evidence building expertise. It exists, it's there, let's use it.
Well, listen, this is fascinating. I hope that we do have another conference on this. You folks are great. Max Steyer, President, CEO of Partnership for Public Service. Catherine Newcomer, Professor at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration, and author of Let's Everybody Go Out and Buy Federal Inspectors General, Truth Seekers in Turbulent Times. And Catherine Archuleta. I bet we dent your Amazon ratings, by the way. Catherine Archuleta, founding partner at Dimension Strategies, and basically helped run every big agency out there. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the first 2 years of the Trump administration, more than 1,600, as I just mentioned, 1,600 federal scientists left government service, according to the Office of Personnel Management. So how do we bring back leading scientists and academics and engineers and just thought leaders back to government? And what does the federal government need to do to be competitive in attracting the next generation of these talented professionals? Our final guest, a very good friend of mine from a long time ago, my team did not know that, is the former acting Secretary of Energy and also the former founder and director of ARPA-E, place I really love. Dr. Arun Majumdar is currently a professor of mechanical engineering and photon science at Stanford University, one of the smartest people I know. Arun, great to see you. It's been a number of years, my friend. Thank you. I should also mention, without compromising him at all, Arun is on everybody's short list eventually to be Secretary of Energy someday. So I can, since he's not there yet, we're going to have Jennifer Granholm, I can ask him, tough questions about this world. But Arun, I guess my first question is how worried are you? What is your decibel level, your DEFCON level, about how how concerned you are about our level of competence and expertise in government today to handle energy, to handle some of our big science-based issues in the nation today?
First of all, fantastic program. I hope the whole country is watching this program and how to sort of build the staffing. At the end of the day, all of these organizations, whether it's federal agency or staff on the Hill, it's all about the people. And I think getting the people right is extremely important. Let me just first say on the scientific side, it really starts from the top. You have a president who ran on science. I think it was a stark reminder in the days of COVID-19 that science matters. And so when the president is saying science matters, it sort of sends the signal to the whole team that this is really, really important. But that's just the message. The second thing President Biden did was to identify a science advisor, Eric Lander, who is a top-notch scientist. And that has sent the signal to the scientific community that he's picking the best. But that was not enough. He has also done something that a lot of previous presidents have not done, and probably, and I don't know my history that well, probably the first time in the history of the United States that he's elevated the science advisor position to the cabinet level position.
It is the first time. It is the first time in history.
He's really in the room.
Yeah, it is the first time in history. No, it is the first time in history. As I'm writing about it right now, so I went back to look. So you're right. It's the first. So not to interrupt, but you're right.
That's right. And given the fact that he will be in the room where decisions are made, it's going to be extremely important. And when you have people like that in the team, it attracts other scientists and engineers to go there and actually serve in a very meaningful way. And so that's one thing. The second thing that President Biden has leaned into is the idea that energy and climate matters. And not only that, he's connected the dots between energy and climate to economic development and jobs. Building infrastructure to handle climate issues is the route to creating jobs. And finally, he's also connected that and elevated the issue of environmental justice and equity. So if you look at the whole spectrum of things, it's the first time in history, I think, that all of these are connected. And that certainly not only requires building on the current career staff that is already there in the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, and other places, but also bringing in new talent, new scientific talent to be able to address this with the pace and scale that the United States deserves.
So let me ask you a question about that ecosystem you just described. And I actually think what you described is very powerful. I talked to the membership of Research America the other day, and I said, by elevating Eric Lander to a cabinet level position, it's a comment on science that's very hard for a future administration to come in and say, we're going to downgrade science. We're going to no longer. So it's an interesting step that may be, hopefully, I think, hopefully in my view, irreversible. But when you're talking to your students, you're talking to your young engineers, you're talking to people around the country that are coming in at Stanford and the many people I know you speak to, do they feel that pull? Are they attracted back now?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, you read my mind in this regard, because the youth of this country, which I deal with on a daily basis, really see this as their issue. I can't tell you how much the last 4 years of taking the eye off the ball on climate and getting out of Paris Agreement, et cetera, that has really motivated the youth to say that we got to do something about it. And I'm not talking about just youth, the students at Stanford. I mean, I travel around the country, not now, but at least I interact with the students across the country, and this is something that they really care about. So I think you're going to see a huge, sort of a pull to serve, to do public service with science in mind. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the Biden administration to be able to attract young people through various mechanisms to bring them into the government.
We're getting close to the end here, which I really regret because I love talking to you, Arun. But I want to talk about your and my favorite subject. It used to be your favorite subject. It's mine, which is ARPA-E. And someday I will write that book about ARPA-E and its founding. Because for folks that don't know, it's sort of an energy department sibling of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. But ARPA-E was a bit different, and this is my take on it, is that the magic of ARPA-E is it provided risk funding. It helped to go out and create lots of ideas, 1,000 flowers bloom in the new renewables, energy, anything in the kind of broad energy space and innovation. But it wasn't government trying to do it all. It was partnered with this space in the private sector, and it worked a lot about how do you get incentives right between what government could do, what the private sector could do, and that magic, could happen. And I saw it happen over and over and over again. And I guess I'm wondering, as I mentioned earlier in the program, we don't have that deep expertise in many of the areas that we need. It needs to be lured back, and that will take time. I'm just wondering, is there something in your experience of creating this environment that was part government, part private, get the incentives right, to begin solving some of these public problems we're going to have because we don't have it? So I know that's a big meta question, but I know that you're the one who can answer it.
First of all, can I just thank you for engaging with ARPA-E at the ARPA-E summits, and not just a few times, many times. You'll be a perennial invitee for the ARPA-E summits. But thank you for doing that, because it really highlights to the American public that fundamental research into breakthrough technology is critical. That is the role for the government. And it may not pay off in 2 or 3 years, but we are now seeing the benefits of that coming out in the public sector. For example, one of the technologies that we had funded, we did not know whether it's going to work or not. Eventually it worked out. That company went public this year, or last 2020, end of 2020, and it was initially valued at $3 billion. Right now it's about like 20 or 30 billion dollars. It's gone up. And it's going to create a whole new battery for the electric vehicle market and many other markets. So that's an example. There are many other such examples that fundamental research, just like we saw DARPA develop the technology for the internet, that completely changed the ball game for not just the United States, for the whole world. I think we're going to see that happen in the energy climate, and it's absolutely necessary given the urgency and scale of the problem. And we're going to see that happen. So the role of the government in funding fundamental research towards breakthrough technologies to create the foundation of new industries that did not exist before, that's exactly the role of ARPA, and it requires the private sector. Now, one of the things that one of the former speakers, Dr. Newcomer, said on the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, I think it's a tremendous opportunity to attract the talent from the universities to bring them into the government. I think in the Department of Energy, we are very fortunate that there are 17 national labs which are there for science and engineering and technology development across the board. And they could be tapped in as well. So I think there's tremendous scientific talent. And it's a question of, can we bring them in quickly enough to really accelerate the pace of research and development? And frankly, at the end of the day, it's jobs, it's our economy.
Well, I'll say to my audience, Dr. Arun Majumdar, is if we get into a whole different energy future, he's going to be one of the primary architects of that. Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Photon Science at Stanford University, founding director of ARPA-E at the Department of Energy, and my good friend Arun Majumdar. Thank you so much for anchoring today's program and your thoughtful and candid views today.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be back.
That brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to Nokia for its support of these set of conversations, and to all of you in the audience for joining us. For those of you who missed any of the conversations this afternoon, we'll have a video up from the event on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemens. Be well.